Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, January 12th. I'm Laura Kornfield, and this is IBA News, broadcasting from Jerusalem. The newest Dolphin-class sub, the INS Rahav, has arrived in Israel from the shipyards of Germany. A special ceremony was held for the docking of the submarine at the Haifa Naval Port this morning, where it was greeted with full military honors. On hand were President Reuven Rivlin, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Chief of General Staff Lieutenant General Gadi Eisenkot, and Head of the Navy Rear Admiral Ram Rothberg. The Prime Minister used his speech at the ceremony to stress the need to maintain Israel's naval capability in the face of ever-growing threats from Iran and extremists everywhere. The newest submarine in the Navy cost about $500 million and has enhanced underwater capabilities which are classified, and according to foreign reports, it can also carry nuclear-tipped cruise missiles. It now boosts Israel's Dolphin-class fleet of diesel-electric submarines to 5. Before pulling into the Navy port in Haifa, the Rahav paused at the site in the open Mediterranean Sea where the submarine Dakar sunk 47 years ago with the loss of 69 lives. Russia is apparently providing Hezbollah with heavy weaponry with no strings attached. A report in the Daily Beast cites 2 senior Hezbollah commanders who claim there is total coordination with the Assad regime in Damascus, Iran, and Russia. Reporters met with the field commanders, who refused to be identified, in Beirut in December of last year and at the beginning of the month. According to their accounts, Hezbollah is receiving long-range tactical missiles, laser-guided rockets, and anti-tank weapons from Russia. Since Russia began its bombing campaign in Syria in September, the Hezbollah operatives said Moscow relies on Hezbollah for intelligence and target selection. The report stated that special forces have been deployed on the ground in the Syrian port of Latakia. The report noted that Russian officials refused to comment on allegations concerning the weapons. Israel is demanding Bulgaria extradite a Palestinian terrorist convicted for the 1986 murder of an Israeli yeshiva student. IBA's Margot Dudkevich has that story.
Extradition of Palestinian terrorist 52-year-old Omar Zayad, who is currently hiding out in the Embassy of Palestine in Sofia, Bulgaria. Zayad fled Israel while serving a life sentence for the 1986 murder of yeshiva student Eliyahu Amedi, who was stabbed 41 times in Jerusalem's Old City by Zayad and 2 other terrorists. In 1990, after going on hunger strike, Zayad was taken to hospital for treatment and escaped and fled the country. He spent the following years in a number of Arab countries before reaching Bulgaria in 1994. Mossad agents tracked him down, and on December 15th, Israel's foreign ministry notified the Bulgarian authorities of his whereabouts and requested his extradition. Realizing he could be arrested, Zayad fled to the Embassy of Palestine, where he still hides out today. The Palestinian Authority said they have no intention in complying with the request, Palestinian envoy to Bulgaria Ahmad Madbouh said. Several days ago, security forces raided Zayad's home in Bulgaria, where he lives with his wife and 3 children, and arrested one of his sons. Zayad is also active in pro-Palestinian groups, and in recent days his supporters took to the streets, calling on the Bulgarian government to refrain from complying with Israel's extradition request. Margot Dudkevich, IBA News.
After months of discussion, the Finance and Defense Ministries reached an agreement to maintain an annual 59.1 billion shekel defense budget for the next 4 years. The agreement was signed in November and stipulates that compulsory service for male soldiers will be cut to 2.5 years in 2022. A number of programs, among them the development of the Army's training headquarters in the south and the privatization of military industries, will no longer be included in the overall defense budget. Fewer officers between the ages of 26 to 28 will be promoted from the rank of captain to major, and if they leave the Army, will not be eligible for any pension. Officers reaching the age of 35 will either be promoted or leave the Army with $500,000 shekel grant. Only those who remain in the defense establishment after the age of 35 will be eligible for a military pension. At least 10 people were killed and over 15 injured in a deadly bombing attack that rocked the center of Istanbul this afternoon. The explosion occurred in the city's historic Sultan Ahmet district that is heavily populated with tourists. Authorities suspect the blast was carried out by a suicide bomber affiliated with Islamic State. The attack comes amid Turkey's growing role in the U.S.-led coalition against Islamic State in Syria and as it battles Kurdish militants in its southeast. Efforts are currently underway in Belgrade to rehabilitate the memory of the former Prime Minister of Serbia who collaborated with the Nazis during World War II. Efraim Zurov, director of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, is strongly opposed to the move, saying the Nazi collaborator was responsible for the extermination of most of Serbia's Jews, and that this was all part of a disturbing trend to distort Holocaust history in Europe.
Obviously an outrageous step, because we're talking about a puppet government set up by the Nazis, which collaborated with the Nazis. And you have to keep in mind that during their period of collaboration, what they called the Government of National Salvation, from 1941 to 1944, almost all the Jews of Serbia were murdered, as well as 300,000 Serbs. So, in other words, this is a person who doesn't deserve to be rehabilitated.
Was the Prime Minister Nadic personally involved in rounding up the Jews and exterminating the Jews of Serbia?
There was collaboration by his people in rounding up Jews. They weren't the ones who committed the murder. But they rounded up Jews, they went looking for Jews, and listen, no one forced him to do this. This is his decision, a very unfortunate decision, and this is basically a Quisling regime.
So what was the level of collaboration in Serbia? Was it like in Latvia and Lithuania?
Serbia is really a very different example, because in Serbia, the number of people who opposed the Nazis was quite large. And Serbia had the biggest resistance movement in Europe. And we're talking about former Yugoslavia now. So, in other words, in that respect, and also there's one other thing, and that is that the Serbs, the Serbian collaborators, were not integrated into the mechanism of murder, of actual murder, but they assisted in rounding up Jews. In other words, they played a role in the implementation of the final solution. Mm-hmm. But it's not the same as Lithuanian murder squads, Latvian Ares Commando, and groups like this.
Well, you made some pretty big headlines in the papers there. It's not going to make friends for the Wiesenthal Center, is it?
Listen, those people who want to see Nedic rehabilitated, it's obviously negative against the Wiesenthal Center. Listen, but the Wiesenthal Center is not, in other words, the purpose of the Wiesenthal Center is not to make friends necessarily. One of the very important purposes of the Wiesenthal Center is to fight against anti-Semitism, and increasingly in Eastern Europe, to fight for historical truth. Mm-hmm. So we have our hands full in this regard, and one of the sad things about this whole issue is that even countries like Israel, which should be one of the first countries to schrei Gewalt, as we say, in other words, to raise a voice of protest against everything that's all these phenomena that are taking place in Eastern Europe, Israel is silent because of other interests. In other words, there's a very ironic situation that's been created in Eastern Europe, where most of the post-communist countries have the highest regard for Israel, like Israel very much, but they hate Jews.
In more local news, a Palestinian who attempted to stab soldiers manning a checkpoint at Beit Hanun near Kiryat Arba was shot and killed this afternoon. No soldiers were injured in the incident. Also today, police released the Arab-Israeli woman suspected of planning to carry out an attack in the north of the country. The 28-year-old resident of Jerusalem, originally from Taibe, was arrested last night riding in a taxi cab in Nahariya after her cell phone was tracked down. She reportedly informed her family of plans to carry out an attack, setting off a widespread terror alert in the northern region. Dozens of roadblocks were placed surrounding the city of Nahariya until the suspect was located and taken in for questioning. Police said she was not found to be carrying any kind of weapon and apparently threatened to act violently after getting into an argument with her relatives. Leah Tzemel, the attorney representing Jewish far-left activist Ezra Nawi, insists he was not trying to flee the country when he was arrested by police at Ben Gurion Airport on Monday. Nawi appeared before the Jerusalem Magistrates Court this afternoon, where police sought his remand on charges of aiding the enemy and conspiring to commit a crime. Nawi was featured last week in a Channel 2 television report, which showed how he tracks down Palestinian landowners seeking to sell their land to Jews and informs the Palestinian Authority of their identity, paving the way for their arrest and possibly death. Police monitored Nawi's movements and arrested him when it became clear he was trying to leave the country. Former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert hopes to strike a deal with the state prosecutor in order to reduce his time in prison. His lawyers are trying to finalize an agreement over a set amount of prison time that the former Prime Minister will serve on remaining cases. This in a bid to avoid further trials and appeals in the Supreme Court. Olmert already faces an 18-month prison term for the Holy Land affair and possibly an additional 8 months on the Talansky affair. Court rulings have yet to be made on the Rishon tours, where he was accused of double billing, and the investment affair when Olmert served as a government minister and reportedly granted favors to others. Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked is continuing to push forward a controversial bill in the Knesset that would require non-governmental organizations to declare funding from foreign countries. The proposed law has recently come under fire from many politicians at home and abroad, including the Obama administration, who claim it restricts freedom of expression and threatens to violate democratic values. Yesterday, Shaked met with U.S. Ambassador to Israel Dan Shapiro in an attempt to ease American concerns over the matter. Following their talks, Shaked said that while Israel is always open to dialogue with friends, it is a strong and lively democracy that does not need international intervention in its domestic legislation. Marking the one-year anniversary of the attacks at the French magazine Charlie Hebdo, high school students from across the country were asked to draw hard-hitting cartoons without being offensive. As it turns out, they did a pretty good job. IBA's Ariel Sullivan has that story.
Be offensive, insightful, and in the case of Charlie Hebdo, lead to violence. But they don't have to be. The Jerusalem Press Club launched a competition to see how cartoonists could strike a balance between criticism of religious and social institutions and the need not to hurt too much the feelings of the public.
Maybe people can really draw cartoons which are strong, which are sharp, but on the same time are not hurting the feelings too much, the feelings of some of the observers.
Adults have been debating this heatedly. The Jerusalem Press Club thought the youth could offer a fresh outlook.
We went to the schools, we found out that cartoon is popular. Comics is very popular. So maybe it's not as widespread as before, but still the students responded very favorably.
The competition, titled Cartoon Criticism Care, drew scores of entries from high schools across the country.
I was surprised by two things. By the insight, by the kind of themes that they chose. You know, we were expecting, you know, oh, how many assignments you give us, and you know, all kind of petty social things, or iPhones, or this, or. And look at this exhibition. They're dealing with the religion and state, with the politics, with sophisticated questions and ideas. And then the second thing which really stunned us, not only me, but also the jury.
Youth came up with some fresh and surprisingly considerate cartoons.
You know, I got some criticism at the beginning because people say, you're censoring. I said, no, you do whatever you want, but think about, can you do it effectively without hurting feelings of some people too much?
This offensive cartoon was intentionally displayed as an example of what they didn't want.
This is a religious or Orthodox guy, a fat one, you know, wealthy, and he says, with God's help, will coerce and succeed. And he's stepping over all the seculars in Israel, who was little and screaming and yelling.
The winning cartoon was chosen because it was decisive yet gentle.
The jury commended it because they said she didn't portray a ultra-Orthodox guy who tells you what to do, but only the hand, very delicately. The hand is moving it.
Second place went to this cartoon on pollution.
All the sewage and the garbage on the beaches. She wrote, in the spirit of the competition, I chose not to shame the people and the plants which did it, but rather to shame the results. So people found a way, a delicate way to walk the thin line between criticizing what they feel is wrong and not hurting the feeling of some people too much.
The exhibit can be seen at Jerusalem's Dweck Gallery in Mishkanot Shananim until the end of the month. In money matters, shares were mixed on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. No significant change in temperatures is predicted tomorrow. Here are the highs and lows for the next 24 hours at home and abroad. And that's all for this newscast. Ari O'Sullivan will be here tomorrow, same time, same channel. Make sure to join him. We leave you now with an amazing display in the skies of southern Israel as hundreds of starlings that arrived in the country after fleeing the harsh winter in Russia and East Europe prepare for the night. I'm Laura Cornfield wishing you a good evening and shalom from Jerusalem.